In this episode of Monday Moments, we're talking about the table, so sit back and stay tuned for more. Hey there, welcome to another episode of Monday Moments, the show in which we take a deeper dive into Sunday sermon. My name is Travis, your host. With me today is Pastor Daniel, the second time in the saddle.
I know, hello.
Love it. Yeah, we are continuing our sermon series and therefore our discussion in Monday Moments on Psalm 23. The title of our sermon series is Satisfied. If you haven't had a chance to watch or listen to Sunday's sermon, you can do so right here on our YouTube channel, on our website, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. It's been an awesome series, and I feel like I've been saying that every week.
Has been.
And good. You even kind of, a little bit of a humor on Sunday, talking about like, as we, the different pastors here at Freedom Fellowship have shared the pulpit. It's kind of like, oh, who's gonna be next? It was you, and so you continued on in Psalm 23, verse 5, right?
That's right. Verse
he
5.
Prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies, and I thought there were so many good things that you shared out of your message. And I loved your personal story, like your own sheep story, right?
Oh, yes.
Of, when you were on a road trip and y'all saw that massive just flock of sheep coming over the berm up in Colorado. And you had to just stop and wait for the sheep to cross the road. And then at the end of the flock, there was the shepherd, leading them from horseback, and the sheepdogs that you don't pet, stay away from the sheepdogs. And really, I felt like you did a great job of really pulling the significance of really all of it. I mean, but specifically, what does it mean to come to the table? And what does that actually mean, and how that applies to us today? And so I thought you did a great job, and I think especially in I think just my own personal, in chaotic times, the Lord has something for us, and I just think that is just such an amazing, relevant in any time, season. It's just such a good promise to hold on to, and so I loved it. As far as, our conversation today, I wondered if you might start. I know this wasn't like the main crux of your message, but it was such a good point. I just felt like we couldn't gloss over it, or we couldn't go without mentioning it, and when you talked about seeing that shepherd lead that flock of sheep from behind, and you illustrated it, or used that to illustrate that's how Jesus leads us. And he leads us with his voice, and he calls us out by name. Tell me a little bit more about the significance of that. What were some of the things that you learned as you were researching and all that? As I mentioned on Sunday, just that story, that picture has just been etched in my mind, and it was such a cool experience. But, as I look at, I feel like every time I've looked at pictures of Israel and Bethlehem, and it talks about God being the good shepherd, and Jesus being the good shepherd, and I look at the atmosphere and everything, it's completely different than the way we picture sheep and the way that I even pictured it. But the way the shepherds still let us flock was something that was actually similar that I learned, and I just remember what I would always see, and then what I would always see through pictures of Israel. It's like something doesn't match. And this was one of those things from just reading Psalms 23. It says that he leads me. And my understanding of leading is this, very strong, somebody leading out in front, like a general to war or something. And as I read this passage, and I remember that shepherd was the last one there, just something was off, and then just through research, and it was even just this week that I learned that's what he was doing was actually what the shepherds in Israel would do too, and shepherds everywhere, because they lead with their voice, and that's what happens. It's funny.
what I learned was shepherds and goats would be in the same herd, and the goats are obstinate and kind of go their own path, and so the shepherd, and they would have sheep and goats, and they wouldn't have the same food source, so the shepherd would be in the middle and have this cloud of sheep going in front. They would be leading with his voice, and the goats would be going everywhere behind, and the idea is, even Jesus talks about, he's got something against goats, and I've never understood that, but it's because sheep listen to the word and goats do their own thing. And so there's kind of two different herds, if you must, and that shepherd is in the middle. And it's like, well, which one are you going to be? Are you going to be the one in the front that listens to his word? Or are you going to be going your own way? Eventually the goats follow, but they're going off on their own. And, but I thought that was so cool, and how that matched what Jesus said about himself. He said, the way that the sheep followed him, or he led them, was whenever he calls their name. And it's not even just a word; it's a personal word. It's a name. And I look at what the Bible says about us. It says that we're his own children. We're the sons and daughters. We're co-heirs. It says a lot about who we are in Jesus. And not only that, it's got his commandments. It's got correction. It's got so much that can lead us, and that's how he chooses to lead. It's very different. And I just thought that was really beautiful that even Jesus modeled that as well. And the sheep responded to it. So.
And I think it illustrates and emphasizes the importance of listening to Jesus' voice and getting to learn what his voice is. I mean, we want to know, where do I go in life? What do I do? I want to make the right decision. I want to follow Jesus. Whatever the case is, we've got to learn the shepherd's voice.
And there's some security in that too, because in John 10, Jesus says, my sheep know my voice. They will not follow the voice, because they don't know his voice. And so there's some security. If God has called your name, like, there's security that you're going to follow the shepherd. And I just think that's a beautiful securing thing that we should be eager to know and to hear God's voice, because that's a hedge against following an enemy. It's going to be a hedge against going down a path or someone who's going to lead us around this desires to destroy us in the sheep. So
and I think if I could just back up kind of at a high level, use that word security. And I think that is a really great word to encapsulate what we can draw from Psalm 23 in general, is that security. I think, sheep don't lay down, they don't eat, they don't drink if they don't feel secure. And so I think part of the answer to the anxiety and the stress and everything that we feel and go through and experience in life is knowing that the shepherd's there with us and that he's speaking to us. He's going to give us those directions as we're as we're walking, as we're going up the mountain or whatever the case might be. And I just think that word security is a great word to encapsulate all of Psalm 23. In the first few verses of Psalm 23, it's a lot of pastoral imagery, right? He talks about, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me into green pastures and beside quiet waters. It's all very, like, as you said, kind of Thomas Kincaid, this very, like, it's almost like, I just imagine it being painted with pastel colors, just something. But then he talks about the psalmist David. He shifts it a little bit to talk about the table.
He does.
So, why the shift? What does a table, coming to the table, have to do with rest and Sabbath and shepherding and sheep? Because again, it could seem like quite a dramatic shift. So what does that have to do with Sabbath and rest?
I think that the table is, for instance, in my family, we work all week, and my favorite times whenever we have friends over, we get to go to a friend's house, and it's just, and it's not even the food. I mean, there is a layer of having that relaxation of not having to make food for the family,
Yeah.
and somebody else does it, it's great. You
Yeah.
know, I mean,
Yeah.
that's why whenever somebody has a baby or somebody's sick, you know, there's meal trains and there's so much happening. It's like, hey, let's not even have to worry about this, and you can just kind of, you don't have to focus and worry about making a meal. Let's just take care of that. And I think that's such a blessing. But it's not even just the food you eat, it's the relationship.
Right.
It's actually being able to come to the table. It's the people you get to hang out with. It's the people you're talking with. And you're actually kind of you know, everything else, it stays at work at the table, you know, and it's just great that you get to interact with people, and there's some security there, and yeah, I just think that that's beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, yeah,
Well, and I think you have to slow down.
exactly.
You have to slow down and take time to eat with people, and
Yes,
and you
yes.
get FaceTime with, you know, whether it's your family or whether it's friends or you know, your spouse or whatever.
Yeah.
And it does kind of make me think a little bit of kind of where we're at in our culture today is we place such an emphasis on convenience.
Yeah.
So we've got lots of fast food options everywhere. You know, how can I swing through, pick up some
Yes.
food so I can get on to the next
Totally.
thing? And to a degree, we've lost that importance and maybe that realization of just how beneficial and how healthy it is to just
Yes.
sit down and have a meal together. Again, whether it's your family or friends or whatever. And so I think coming to the Lord's table means that we are going to forego some of the convenience and set aside some of the, like, I've got this to do, I've got that to do, I've got, you know, emails or work or, you know, all these other responsibilities, you know, the house, whatever. And I'm just going to spend time with the Lord. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I was telling him, like, you know, I don't have, you know, a tremendous amount against
Sure.
reading the Bible or listening to it while I'm doing other things. I don't think that's necessarily bad in and of itself. But there's something different when I take God's word and I set aside everything else and I say, I'm just making this time about being in God's presence.
Yeah.
And it, you know, he's like, yeah, because it's a priority. And I was like, oh, there it is,
There
you
it
know?
is, yeah.
And it really is when you prioritize, I think that relationship with your family,
Exactly.
with your friends, with whatever. I think that's where the table connects to Sabbath.
Yeah, you've got to make that room for it, you know. And if you don't make the room to sit down at the table, you know, with your family, it's sometimes harder to reclaim that. But I think it's the same with being in the Word, with our Lord, you know, and just making that space for it. It's man, what was I gonna say? It's interesting too. You look at Psalms 23, and it's kind of the first 3 verses. It's really about God providing, you know, and then that shift that happens. You know, we're guests, and it's like there's the provision, but then there's honor that he gives. He anoints our heads with oil. And so there's a shift. Whenever you have people over, whenever you're sitting, you're giving them that time, you're giving them honor.
Yeah.
It's not about what I'm giving you. I mean, like that fast food concept, that's providing,
Sure.
you know, kind of, but
Yeah.
it's just, it's maybe unhealthy, but but there's a layer of honor that happens. You know, I remember even my dad having, you know, at his table growing up, and then at our table, it was always the coolest thing. At my dad's table and our table growing up is, you know, my parents would ask, what was the best part of your day? And you had that honor where you could just say, this is what happened. You got to, I remember my dad always saying, I would think all afternoon about what I was going to say because he had that chance to just talk to his parents.
Wow.
And I'm just like, man, what if I had that same understanding? It's like, I get to say what I did today, you know? And there's so much pride and there's honor there because you're given the time to communicate and whatnot. So.
Yeah, it makes me think. I have a friend of mine. He's much, you know, older, but he got his son-in-law was one of the campaign managers of one of the former presidents, and so because of that, he and his wife, this friend of mine and his wife, got to actually go to a presidential banquet. Like they got an invitation to go have dinner with the president. And here he was saying, like, good old country boy
Who am
like
I?
me, like who am I to go sit with the president,
know.
And so I think that's such a fascinating and powerful truth that you've just drawn out of this, is that there's this elevation.
Yeah.
Especially when we are faced with the realization that we are sinners and we're not worthy to be in God's presence.
Totally.
That who am I that the King of Kings would elevate me to a position of honor, that I could be invited to his table.
And he serves us.
Exactly.
It's great.
Yeah. So I just think that's such an amazing, powerful truth that you just brought up. I think there's a lot to that. And I think for those of us who have struggled or are struggling with shame or regret or just this general feeling of unworthiness. I mean, of course we're not deserving, but he loves us enough to call us and invite us to the table. That's amazing. Thanks for that. That was good.
Yeah.
Just in wrapping up, we talk about coming to the table of the Lord. The Lord's inviting us to his table, and obviously we can't see God, I can see you right here. So there's a little bit of a kind of an abstract concept or nature to this idea of come to the table of the Lord. But there's a very real truth to that. So what does that look like practically? How, somebody's watching this or listening to this and they're saying, okay, I want to respond to the Lord's invitation and come to the table. What does that look like?
I'm going to go back a little bit to that difference between how we view the sheep and what it was in the Middle East during that time. And during the sermon yesterday, I showed that picture after the Thomas Kincaid quote. It's this desert, the Judean desert, and it's a pasture. They would say that's a pasture.
Wow.
And I'm like, what was David thinking? And I think that's the truth right there, is their sustenance did not come from the mountain. I mean, it came from the leadership of the sheep, of the shepherd.
Yeah.
And so their hope is not based on their ability to go find it. And so often we have to go to the world to go find those things. But Jesus is like, I've made a table. It's right here. Yeah. Come to me rather than go out there. And we work, we go out and stuff, but he's, at the end of that day, he's like, here's the table and everything's provided. And what does that look like to go to the table? Just thinking about it, I may have mentioned this before on Sunday, but my wife and I, we actually bought a hoarder's house. If you watch like the Netflix show Hoarders, it is
it was one of those.
It was one of those. A lot of stories there. And as a result, we've been working on it a long time. And there's a lot of things that need to be repaired that he didn't even see because there was stuff there. And so we're constantly working on it's kind of nice. It's kind of fun at the same time.
Yeah.
But there's so much work that has to be done. And big repairs, roof, foundation stuff. There's plumbing. We can't do it all at once.
Yeah.
And I can get really overwhelmed with that. And I can think, how am I going to pay for this? And when am I going to have time to do this? And I can get so consumed about my place of lack. And I can say, God, why are you not providing this? And I can get angry about it. But the reality is, God has everything that I need. He knows what I need before I ask. So I've got to let his word lead me. And I've got to know what's true about God, regardless of the circumstances, the condition of my home. Or whatever. I mean, it's looking really good. It's looking a lot better. But I have a choice to either keep concerning myself and staying anxious about what has to get done, or I can just come to him and say, Lord, you provided all of this in the past, so I'm going to trust you for the future too. Yeah. And there's just this amount of rest, and there's almost an element of worship and praise that ensues, because it's like, instead of constantly looking at my lack, I'm looking to the Lord who's able to sustain me and take care of all this. And there's just a peace and a rest. I don't have to worry about it because he knows what I need. And I let my truth, and it's more than just knowing what his word says. It's actually living it out. Like, living it out is coming to the table. I mean, James talks about it. If you know what the word says to do and don't do it, what good is it? You've got to be listeners and doers. I mean, even Jesus talks about it. He talks about the foolish and the wise builder. And then at the end of that, he says, the wise builder is this, the one who hears my word and puts it into action.
Yeah.
And so putting it into action is saying, I'm not going to worry about this. And I'm going to say, God, you are such a good provider. And I just get to relax in that and meet with him. And, yesterday I was saying, it's like, man, there's so many things against us and contrary to what we're doing. And, like our lives are at a place of lack. It's just like that desert, arid mountain that I showed. That's the pasture. There's not much there. So that's why we have to go to Jesus. That's why we have to go to the shepherd, because he's our source of provision. And I was telling people, it's like, man, we've got to not face our enemies. We've got to turn our face to Jesus and say, Lord, I'm coming to you because I ain't got nothing out there.
Yeah.
Like, you have the words of life, like Peter said. So, and there's relaxation. We're turning our backs on the desert, and we're saying, no, my hope is not from there. My hope is in you.
Yeah, right.
So, I think that's kind of what it means to come to the table, is to come to Jesus, believe in who he says he is from his word, and kind of put your money where your mouth is. Like, if this is what he says he is, I'm going to trust him. Yeah. And I'm going to let this other stuff rest for right now. So,
yeah, and that makes me think, I think your illustration of your house, there's so many layers. Like, I think that could almost be a sermon in and of itself. Partially because I know, some of the stuff. But like, seeing what the Lord has promised to provide for us.
Sure.
Resting in that, and that can be like varying degrees of temptation to trust that or not, depending on the season of life. But that choice can either lead us to a place of contentment and gratitude and rest, real rest, that I'm not anxious about these other things. Or if we choose not to, I think that the temptation for us is, well, if I get this thing, or if I get that thing, or this status, or this title, or whatever, it's going to fill my life. It's going to satisfy me. And I just imagine whether it's with literal material things, or whether it's mental, emotional things, like we become hoarders, right? Because we want to, like, oh, I'm going to provide for myself. I'm going to fill the hole in my life. I'm going to try and satisfy my own needs, and I'm just going to pile it on.
Yeah.
And before too long, we look like what your house probably looked like before you and Emily got a hold of it and started turning it around. And yet Jesus is saying, I've got what you need.
Yes.
And don't worry about what you may or may not see.
Yeah.
I've got what you need. And we've got to
and hoarding that stuff actually made a bigger mess in this house. It was more destructive.
Yes.
Than just resting.
Yeah.
It was very destructive.
And that's exactly what Jesus said. Come to me, all you who are weary and what heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And I just think of all of that baggage, again, whether it's like literal material possessions, or whether it's mental, emotional baggage, status, so lifestyle, what the sky's the limit.
Having your worth met out externally from the shepherd.
What a heavy burden to try to carry outside of resting in what Jesus promised he would provide, whether we're on the mountaintop already, or whether we're in the presence of our enemies.
Absolutely.
That's really good. Well, thanks so much for taking some time out of your day. Such a good message. And thank you for watching another episode of Monday Moments. We hope that you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please let us know. We would love to hear from you. However you want to do that, whether you can leave us a comment, send us a message, an email, we would just always love to hear from you. Thank you so much again for joining us for another episode of Monday Moments, and we will see you next week.